progress.
And Amelia, we're ready to go, yes?
Yes, you're live now.
Thank you very much. Welcome back from the break. I'm David Ackerly, Dean of the Rausser College of Natural Resources at UC Berkeley. I'm honored to host this discussion with two distinguished individuals who have and continue to play leading roles addressing climate resilience, in particular the role of government action at different levels, and how in the United States, federal and state governments have worked together in the past. And I expect most everyone in this conference would agree they need to continue to work together now and in the future. As the theme of this event is in part focused on the role of subnational governments, it is particularly important to address the relationships between government agencies at different levels. I'm pleased to introduce our two speakers. The Honorable Jane Lubchenco, PhD, is a professor at Oregon State University and a member of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. She has just returned from 4 years in the White House, serving as Deputy Director for Climate and Environment in the Office of Science and Technology Policy. Dr. Lubchenco was a key member of the team responsible for the most ambitious climate goals and actions ever taken at the federal level. She previously served in the first Obama administration as the head of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and subsequently as the U.S. Science Envoy for the Ocean. Also joining us is Massachusetts Climate Chief, Melissa Hoffer. Chief Hoffer is the nation's first cabinet-level climate official and Massachusetts' first ever climate chief. As the head of the Office of Climate Innovation and Resilience, Chief Hoffer coordinates a whole-of-government approach to developing climate policy and ensuring a resilient future for the state. Previously, she worked within the Biden administration as acting general counsel of the EPA and within the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. In lieu of opening remarks, we're going to jump right in. We only have a short time, and I'm confident that each of our speakers will have ample opportunity to share their most important observations and reflections. So I want to go back to the distant past, which would, of course, be before November 5th, 2024. And both of you were in your, well, Dr. Lubchenco, you were in the White House, and Chief Hoffer, you were in your current role. And can you set the stage for us of how the federal and state governments were working together towards climate solutions? Dr. Lubchenco, I'll turn to you first.
So, David, let's face it, really big problems require all hands on deck. And during the last 4 years, we saw the power of strong alignment of purpose and bold leadership in federal and state governments. They were pulling together in the same direction, and that resulted in historic progress in tackling climate change, creating jobs, and strengthening our collective ability to have a vibrant future. So in my view, states and the federal government have different but nicely complementary roles. We heard earlier today from Governors Healy and Newsom about some of the pioneering policies and actions that are underway in Massachusetts and California. At the federal level, the Biden administration's historic goals, smart policies, and very significant resources from the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law triggered and enabled really impressive action across the nation by federal agencies, by states, by tribes, local governments, businesses, financial sector, communities, individuals. But I think it's really important to know, and maybe this is kind of a little secret, the bold actions that were taken by the federal government in the last 4 years were made possible in part by the work of the states and the cities 4 years prior to that. The last time the U.S. withdrew from the Paris Agreement, many governors and mayors stood up and said, "We are still in." And their strong actions continued the momentum. They forged new paths, they enabled continued progress. And that's really key because states and cities are closer to the action. They can pioneer new approaches, they can be a little more flexible. And of course, because they bear the brunt of climate catastrophes, they really are on the front lines. So make no mistake, the challenges this time around will be much tougher. Nonetheless, given what's at stake, it's even more important that states, cities, tribes, businesses, civil society boldly take the baton and run like the wind, if you will. As they do so, I want to highlight the importance of continuing to integrate climate, nature, and environmental justice, which is one of the things that the federal government was really focused on during the last 4 years, that integration. And both Secretary Crowfoot and Governor Newsom emphasized earlier the importance of nature-based solutions as key to tackling the climate crisis. We've had a very siloed approach in the past with climate here, nature here, environmental justice here. The reality is we need to integrate them. And as a marine ecologist, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that nature includes the ocean. And in fact, the White House led an interagency effort that produced an ocean climate action plan that we released in 2023. And as that plan pointed out, there's no path to net zero that doesn't go through the ocean. So as we think about nature-based solutions, those are both on land and in the ocean. So these integrated approaches were one of the things that we really were leaning forward, strongly forward on, that now need to be continued. So I'm passing the baton. So actually, baton to you, Melissa.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Dr. Lubchenco. And I couldn't agree more with all of your points. And I think I will just add a few things that align with how we're thinking about what was the sort of cooperative federalism approach prior to November. And that is, we really see that this shift towards clean energy, the shift towards more resilient communities is a huge economic development opportunity. And so what we saw with things like the Inflation Reduction Act, and here I'm going to focus specifically on the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund monies, there's roughly $27 billion, 7 to Solar for All, and 20 in 2 different tranches for funding state and local activities, and a large part of it running through existing green banks. So what that is a really novel approach that doesn't just have us issuing grants. We're always going to need to do grants at the state and federal level. That's important. And we're in a time where we really need to be stretching our dollars and recycling our dollars. And that's what a green bank allows us to do. If you think about a well-established green bank like the Connecticut Green Bank, for every dollar that Connecticut invests in decarbonization, it pulls in $7 of private sector investment. So when you think about the overall investment that the US government was making through Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, it is leveraging, estimates of 7 to 10 times that amount in the broader economy of private sector investment. So that's super important. Why is that super important? Because it creates jobs. And for a state like Massachusetts, which is, one in the top 4 states in the country right now for climate technology, and we are seeking to get to that #1 slot. Sorry, California. But, we really want to be the center, just like as we have been for life sciences. And that's why you saw Governor Healy sign into law the Mass Leads Act at the end of last year, which invests about a little over $1 billion in ensuring that we become that climate tech hub. And that also includes resilience technologies. So it's a way we see the opportunity in this moment. It's a very difficult moment, and there is economic opportunity for us. And when we think about the economic impacts of climate change, looking at things like the LA fires, the numbers coming out of that, $250 billion, Hurricanes Helene and Milton together, over $100 billion. Climate change, let's face it, is bad for the economy, period, full stop, bad for the economy. So one of the things we really have to be focused on here is figuring out how to avoid the economic harms of climate change while also being able to leverage the benefits of a clean energy transition and making our communities more resilient and on all of the technological innovation that will come from that. So I would say that, and then, the Biden administration's focus on greening industrial policy as well, which is, another way to bring jobs here, really, really big and really, really very important. And you saw bipartisan states across the board benefiting significantly from those policies. And it's hard to underscore overestimate the importance of that.
I appreciate your point about those races to be at the top. This is where competition serves us. And we have 50 states and 50 experiments in climate resilience. And of course, we learn a lot from each other, the same in the educational systems. I know you have invested, I know you're thinking very hard about finance in a sort of all of government approach for Massachusetts. So just to jump right into the moment, how do you think your strategies are going to be shifting now in working with the new administration in where you seek the financial investments for Massachusetts, where the partnerships may continue?
Sure.
Whatever you're able to share with us today.
Yeah. So, and David, I'm going to keep my comments here focused on resilience finance, since
Sure.
that's the focus of the conversation. There's a separate conversation to be had about financing decarbonization, which is a little bit easier in some ways,
Yep.
because we understand the energy savings attributable to decarbonization investments, and it's easier to finance projects off of those savings. With resilience, that's a little bit different. I think we will get there, but the history of understanding the value and for the insurance companies, really like the actuarial data of understanding the value of resilience investments, for example, isn't there yet, but we're getting there. So when Governor Keeley established my role through executive order, she also required that I provide a report to her at the 6-month mark, basically recommending, here's where we're doing well, here's where we have gaps to fill, and what are the recommendations. So the top 2 recommendations in that report were figure out ways to better fund and finance our efforts to get to our own state legally mandated from our own legislature net zero by 2050, and figure out ways to fund and finance resilience. So for the past several months, we've had studies underway to do exactly that. And for us, for resilience, we identified a series of what we called key resilience measures. I'm not going to walk through all of them for you, but they're exactly what you would think. Things like culvert replacement. We are seeing lots and lots of inland flooding here. Things like removing and repairing our high hazard dams, preparing for high heat events across the state. It's a real risk for our state. Protecting coastal and riverine floodplains, thinking about that. And forest conservation, to Dr. Lubchenco's point about really understanding the monetary value, which thanks to her work is now monetizable, of preserving these ecosystem services that are so important, not just for decarbonization, but also for resilience. And of course, relocating our critical infrastructure, including things like transportation and transit. So those are the things we have to take care of. The costs of these things first, even a small state like Massachusetts, are in the order of tens of billions of dollars. So when we think about these things, we are thinking about stretching the dollars. And by that, I mean leveraging them. I'm going to give you an example. Recycling the dollars, again, getting paid back into whatever fund or corpus that we create. Repurposing dollars, because we already time when it's going to be hard to ask for additional revenue streams. Affordability is a really key issue in our state, as I know it is in yours and many others right now. And then thinking about innovative partnerships. So, with all that, we are focusing on a couple different ideas, and we haven't made our decisions about, finally what we're going to pursue. But we do have some really good models here. We have a model of our Clean Water Trust. That trust has revenue that comes in from a dedicated revenue source, and that allows us to bond against that. So thinking about the possibility for a resilience fund that would have dedicated revenue coming in from a couple different streams that we're considering, and if you read the literature on this, there's a wide variety of things. These can include benefits assessments from things like, wastewater fees. It can include types of insurance surcharges and the like. So it can include a whole host of different revenue streams. But the idea is you have that dedicated revenue stream coming into the fund. You get that out immediately to municipalities to fund and finance shovel-ready projects in their areas. They start to pay back those loans. They pay back those loans, start coming in right around year 3. You have enough of a repayment stream coming in that is solid enough for you to go to the bond market and bond against that. And then you can triple or more the money that you have available for these projects. So that's one model that we're looking at. Innovative partnerships is another thing. You might recall from our Vatican Summit, we entered into a very interesting relationship. It's brand new for us with social finance. That is to help us fund job creation in this space, which can be anywhere from, the folks who are going to help build offshore wind, to those who are installing solar panels, to those who are going to help, do the work that we need to shore up our infrastructure in light of the climate impacts that we're going to be experiencing. So what social finance does, it's effectively impact investing. They've got a fund like this in New Jersey right now. They put in a set amount of money into a fund. We put in a set amount of money into the fund. That money then goes for training for workers. When the workers graduate from those training programs, once they hit a certain earnings target, in our case, it's $45,000 a year, they start to pay those loans back. They're interest free. Any workaround services that come, or wraparound services that come with that, for example, if you need childcare, we'll pay for it. If you need transportation, we will pay for it. If you need somebody to pay for your books, we'll pay for it. You don't pay that back. You just pay your tuition back. So that's another thing that we are thinking about with this. And so those are the kinds of ideas that we have. There are other things that are out there that we're also very interested in, like resilience bonds. That is a not very widely used approach right now, but it's a very promising area for us. And if you think about it, it is essentially an approach that allows you to value monetarily a particular infrastructure project, like let's just say a seawall for a certain geographic area. What would the damages be from a storm surge without that seawall versus what would they be with that seawall? And then that delta is the valuation of the resilience project. And then you can start to create a revenue stream from that, a present day value for that future avoided damage. So those are some models that we're thinking about, and I think I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you. No, this is for those of us who've been in meetings like this 5 years ago or 10 years ago, 15 years ago. We were not having these conversations. We were still talking about projections and potential damages, and the lessons we've learned about the financial instruments, of course, are so important, and transferable lessons, between jurisdictions, which is what's so valuable here. And on that note, Dr. Lubchenco, you've been in science and policy for many years, and here we do have an international audience. This is kicking off a series of summits that go around the world. So what can you actually offer about lessons you've learned serving in OSTP, serving as a scientist, working with policymakers, that you think go beyond just the American experience or the federal experience that can help jurisdictions around the world set us up for success?
So that's a great question, David. Thank you. Science, to those of us who are in the science, we have our own language, our own framing, the things we talk about. The same is true in the policy world. And so one thing that I've learned is in bringing science to policy, which is what the academicians do within the Pontifical Academy, to the Vatican, to the Pope, to the world. But from my role at OSTP, bringing science into the policy world in both of those arenas, one of the most important things is not to just get deep into the science and get nerdy about it, but to explain the so what, to talk about why it matters, why it's relevant. That's not always easy for scientists to do, but it's really important. The same is true for people in the policy world. The policy folks tend to get really wonky, and they really get into the really important nitty gritty. But for both scientists and policymakers, talking to the world about climate change, they need to get out of that wonkiness and talk about very concrete benefits. What is, how does this matter to people in different places, in different parts of the world? Focus on the so what. And so whether it's a scientist talking or a policy maker talking, focusing on the so what of the thing, the science or the policy, that's what really matters. And so telling stories about climate action is more important now than ever before. And that's true wherever you are. We've seen and heard a lot of really important data and evidence that climate action means economic benefit, but that story has not been told to the extent that it needs to be. And so telling the stories that are grounded in reality, that are grounded in facts, is really important. Another thing that we learned when I was at OSTP, OSTP oversees the production of the National Climate Assessment, which is a scientific assessment about the state of climate and its impacts in the US, and it's done every 4-ish years. And the leaders of the 5th National Climate Assessment had a brilliant idea, which was to engage a much broader audience in this conversation through art. And they had an art by climate competition, a juried art competition. And we had over 800 submissions, selected 90-ish for the eventual report. But that just opened up so many more doors and so many more stories about climate, but in this case through art. And so seeking ways to connect with people about the so what, how it matters, telling stories through art, I think is a really important lesson learned that is true wherever you are.
No, that's wonderful. We know, and there's no question it reaches people from all walks of life. Music, I actually am an advisor to the Climate Music Project. Similarly, trying to reach new audiences and in new formats. So Chief Hoffer, and you're sitting in a role, you're the first climate chief in the nation. You're on the governor's cabinet. You're interacting with the secretaries of the various agencies. So you have sort of an all of government portfolio, but also probably almost everything intersects with other agencies and secretaries. And I want to stay with the science theme a little bit. So, to what extent are you the messenger for science to those other agency heads who, may not be able to bring it into their day-to-day? To what extent is it more, maybe more the storytelling than the science in that sort of abstract science sense? How do you find yourself, how are you effective on the cabinet? What are you finding the lessons to be to how to be effective as a cabinet member?
So, it's no surprise, but like anything, it's really the relationships and the trust building. When I first took this job, somebody from the Kennedy School reminded me, government moves at the speed of trust. And it is something that I remind myself a lot because I'm a pedal to the metal person. And so sometimes what is important is to really slow down and build the relationship of trust. We were just at Worcester Polytechnic last week, celebrating our new Climate Tech Economic Development Plan. And I was there speaking with our Economic Development Secretary, Yvonne Howe. And we like to tell a story. We were doing an event here back in the spring around climate tech. And there was just a bunch of people there, including some of our colleagues from California. And California colleagues were very surprised. And they said to her, wow, in California, our economic development people really, they're not that tight with the climate people. You guys are friends. And we were saying, yeah, we actually are good friends. And that has allowed us to have some conversations that have been kind of hard because it does remain the case that there is still some, misconception out there that those two things are in competition. Economic development and work on climate can't go together. Well, we've had the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative here now for, well over a decade, and we've decoupled economic vitality from efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We know we can do both, and we've got, how many years of reports from analysis group telling us that we can. Yeah. So that's a lesson that we have here. And working with the secretaries, we've got people who are at the top of their fields and the top of their professions, but they might not be expert on climate change. So one of the tools that we have used is called Climate Cabinet. Climate Cabinet meets before regular cabinet once a month. And what we used that time for, largely, not solely, but in the first 2 years, we used that to bring in experts from a bunch of different fields in a closed environment where people would feel safe asking any question that they had about it. No other staff in the room. This is really your time to be educated about something. And we learned about all kinds of things. We had people come in and talk to us about sea level rise and its impact, projected impact on real estate in Massachusetts. We had folks come in and talk about insurance sector impacts of climate change, unpacking a little bit about what's happening in Florida. we had folks, and these, when I say folks, I am talking about, professionals at the top of their game, and academics coming in and educating us on these things, talking about, how we can use capitalism to fight climate change. We had some of the most, thinking about the last presenters, hearing from some of the youth, some of the most compelling. We had a couple of medical professionals come to us from Mass General Hospital and talk about what they were seeing showing up in their clinical practices with adolescents who are suffering from anxiety and depression as a result of their fear and their worry about climate change. So all kinds of opportunities to learn together about how climate change is impacting the subject matter that our secretaries are responsible for.
Yeah.
Lots of stuff on climate and health. And then I work and meet with all of these folks frequently, and we had an administrative mechanism that I want to mention too in the executive order, because I think it's very important for other states who are doing this. You have to have, in addition to the relationships, you have to have the administrative infrastructure in place. And the executive order created something called a Secretariat Climate Officer. So every one of the secretaries designated a senior person that was going to be that person's going to own climate. And these weren't new positions because we can't afford to do that. And we don't want that. We want people who are specialists in their area, whether it's health or public safety or transportation, who will also be responsible for carrying climate. And as a practical matter, that's ended up kind of being a handful of people in each secretariat. But we work very closely with those folks because they're expert in their areas. And then I serve on other, boards and opportunities for our Transportation Funding Task Force, for example. I'm going to be co-chairing our Intergovernmental Coordinating Council on Lower Embodied Carbon. I work very closely with our procurement officials. So we have that structure in place that drove that interaction. And I think that's also very helpful, just in addition to taking the time with each other to build the trust to have difficult conversations.
Oh, thank you. Look, these are nuts and bolts lessons for leadership in government across the board. We have time for one question, and the answers will have to be short, but it's not an easy question. If there are people in this country who they don't want to hear about it. They don't want to hear about climate change. And look, some of it's stress, some of it's political, whatever it is, or threats to livelihoods. We know there's a wide range, and we have to meet everyone where they are and not take that for granted. So if your house burns down in LA, house is flooded out in North Carolina, if you're subject to sea level rise in Virginia, does it matter to that person at that moment whether climate change caused that event? Like, when does it matter? Who needs to actually grapple with this? Or to what extent do we not need to get in there? We just need to get in and help people, even if government at some level is thinking about what caused it. So Dr. Lubchenco, does it matter that people understand that's why their house burned down? And it's not an easy, and we all know the why is not an easy yes or no. It's a complicated problem, but without unpacking that at the moment.
So I think anyone who has suffered a really catastrophic experience and loss, first and foremost, needs to have some sympathy. That's just really a heart-wrenching thing. And that's not an opportunity to be pointing fingers and to be preaching. It's an opportunity for empathy and an expression that we are in this together and we are helping one another. And I think that's not the moment to be talking about how we collectively need to be working together for a better future for all, for our children and for others, and finding that common ground in a belief in the future, a caring about children that comes not from a set of facts and figures, but from beliefs and values. It comes, as Catherine Hayhoe says, it really needs to come from the heart, not from the head. The head can help inform the action, but it has to be motivated by the heart.
Thank you. Chief Hoffer, we're running out of time, and I think it's a lovely thought. And Dr. Lubchenco, you mentioned children, the kids who are speaking up, and I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge what an extraordinary session we had just before, hearing from students across all levels of education, and part of this is we can't abdicate our responsibility and put it on the next generation. We have to all be in it together with an emerging generation, and I'm so thrilled that we had the previous panel. Thank you both for sharing your insights and experience. I hope there's some lessons learned there that can be shared widely across jurisdictions and conversations that will continue in summits around the world as we move forward. Stay tuned for the next event in the conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Good night, Dr. Lubchenco.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you guys all. The session is now closed. So if everyone would join the next section from the lobby. Thank you all again.